Civilized me. Welcome to civilization. Welcome to civilization.
Hey everyone, I thought I would show you a quick edit for the iPhone, just to kind of refresher if you've taken the course or if you haven't taken the mobile course, a little example of what you might see in the course. So I took this series of images from iPhone 16 Pro, and in the PDF of the course itself, I have a variety of iPhones 11, an iPhone 14 Pro. I've just kind of years worth of photos. So don't feel like you have to have the newest phone to make good pictures with your phone. You just need to know how your phone camera works. And I talk all about that in the PDF of making the best from your camera. And as the technology grows, the advancement in pixels and the images are becoming a lot better, and it's wonderful. So it's not to say the newer cameras, you probably are going to get better quality photos or just more high dynamic range, like highlights and shadows, but it's not to say you can't make great pictures with what you have as well. So again, that's something you can check out in the PDF. I go much more detail into all of that and having an understanding of what your camera can do. But here's a quick editing video showing you what I use mine for. And I find myself using my phone much more than I ever have, especially after creating the class itself. It really just solidified my knowledge of my phone's camera, and it made me confident in being able to use it and not afraid that I'm going to miss something. There is a little more play for editing wise because I do like my images to match up to my other camera. I have a Canon that I use, and I like them to be interchangeable. I like to have them blend together so it's hard to tell what I used. And so it takes a little bit more editing, or just a different style of editing, I should say. I can't say it takes me much longer, but I just change up a little bit how I edit. So this is what I'm going to show you today. So you can see with the iPhone camera, it's known to be just overly sharp. Everything's in sharp focus. You can use the portrait mode, but I have issues with that, so I usually tend not to use it. And if I'm going to create any kind of bokeh, I'll do it in Photoshop or in Lightroom. Lightroom has that option now because it's not always real looking. It depends on how close you are to your subject and all that kind of stuff. But in a scene like this, there's so much detail going on. There's the grass back here, the trees back here, the sky, and then my subject in the middle of it all. If I use portrait mode, this would not be a pretty like you would see with your 85 millimeter camera lens. You're not going to get the same results. So for me, that's disappointing and frustrating. So I prefer just to use the main camera, and I know I can bring the softness back in Photoshop. And so we can look here. So let me show you where I started. I just kind of did some basic editing. This is where the original photo, I wanted to be careful because I know my camera on the phone does not have a very high dynamic range. So being able to bring back the highlights versus the shadows, I have to balance that really well. And with skies like this, the sun was behind us and there was some storm clouds overhead. You have to watch out that you're not going to lose the highlights in this because my phone, and specifically, I know it doesn't do highlights well at all. So I tend to kind of watch my highlights more than my shadows, but I also try to find that middle ground. So I was easily able to bring it back. They weren't too bright at all, which I was pleasantly surprised. I was afraid it might be, but I was able to bring that down. So I brought the whole scene down, and let me show you my settings over here. I have it masked off. So I have the sky masked where I lowered the highlights, brought up the shadows, just kind of added some contrast there. I lowered the white. So let's see, you can kind of see where that started. If I take that off, the whole scene kind of is a little bit darker, and I was able, let's go back to the full screen here. There we go. Okay, so taking that mask off, you can see I was able to add a little bit of contrast, raising the shadows, lowering the highlights. and just kind of bringing in the dehaze. I like to use that for the sky. When I'm editing for my iPhone photos, it takes a light hand on the editing, where if I'm using my full frame camera, I have a lot of pixels to play with. So I can really kind of get into this more. But when you're editing with your phone, you really, it's everything is very slight. There's just slight movements with this, and it makes a big difference. So don't feel like when you're editing, it's not going to be a straight across edit. You do have to adapt for the pixels that you have, for the range that you have. So it's going to be a little bit softer of a hand. So where something like my Canon, I would lower the highlights all the way down. This is going to make a big difference, and it'll affect it a little bit differently than with that I would with my full frame camera. So let's bring that back. And then I also created a mask for the grass as well. Now you can see when I toggle it off and toggle it back on, the main thing I did with the grass, because the iPhone likes to have everything in sharp focus for the most part, especially when your subject's at a distance, I always like to bring down the texture and the clarity depending on what it is. Usually not so much on my subject, but in grass or trees or anything like that, I always will kind of bring out that background layer or the surrounding area minus my subject and bring the texture and the clarity down. And you can see when I toggle this on and off in the grass, the difference that that makes alone. So you can see it's very sharp texture. If you like that look, the textured look, that's great. It'll do it right for you. But I like the soft, wind-blown grass look. And that's what I was going for here when I saw it against the blue sky. And so I made sure to lower the texture and the clarity and the dehaze just slightly, just kind of give it that glowy, soft feeling. And then I also added a mask just to kind of darken the foreground just slightly. I wanted to just bring a little bit of depth, bring the light to my subject and kind of separate the foreground from the background and the middle ground. So you can see here when I toggle this on and off, I just brought down the exposure and the highlights just slightly for this layer. This is a linear mask here. And then I brought my subject. For my subject, I raised the exposure just slightly, just to make him stand out a little bit. Not a ton, but just to give him that the sun is hitting him feel. So I brought up the exposure and the whites just slightly. And then the same thing, I made a glow, kind of a radial mask around him just to give, I raised the shadows and the exposure just slightly. Could also bring down to the dehaze as well here if you wanted to, and give him that glowy look as well. So we could toggle this on and off. Just where your eye is drawn, like it's very subtle. It's not super noticeable, but it's enough where it kind of draws your eye to the middle. Your eye is drawn to the lightest part of your images, typically, and so otherwise it's color, but light draws your eye in. So by subtly bringing that light to the center and on my subject, I'm going to draw attention to him. I'm going to pull that just slightly down. And another thing I like to do with my iPhone photos to match them to my full frame, my Canon photos, is I always change it to a 2:3 when I'm editing, because the crop ratio for iPhone photos are different than the full frame. And I like all my pictures to match. So when I have them in an album or I have them in my 365 albums, that all the pictures are cohesive and they're not different sizes. So that's one thing that I always make sure to do as well. So that's where we started, just in Lightroom edits. So now we're going to go over to Photoshop and I'll show you how I handled the pictures here as well. So for this one, what I like to do, first off, I'm going to make a copy of the background. So Command J. And for this layer, I'm going to I'm going to take my subject out, because I'm going to blur this other layer, and I don't want the edges of him to kind of become an issue when you're trying to mask off your subject again. The edges, if it's, Gaussian blur or lens blur, you start to have the edge of them, and then the trees in the backgrounds, when you're masking him off, the edges of the trees around him you can see, and it's a mess. So it's easiest to just mask your subject out completely on this layer. So we'll do that really fast. And then I'm going to go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Or you could do lens blur. Either one would really work. I just use Gaussian, but you could do either really. So let's bring the subject back. Easiest way for me is to select the background layer, select subject. Okay, deselect that. He blends in too well. So we'll just take object, that, okay, layer copy. There we go. So we brought him back. Now we want to add some depth back in. So I'm going to take my brush and just like a lens would have, you're going to have a plane of focus. So I'm going to follow this plane. Let's start with 30% black brush, and we're going to brush it right where he's standing, straight across. And you're going to have some of the grass that's in the foreground that might come through, but this background's busy enough that it blends it really well. But this way it gives the trees in the background a little blur, and then we can softly bring it back to the foreground if we want. Okay, you can see toggle it on and off, what that adds to the scene. So that's pretty simple, and that adds a lot of depth, just quick and easy like that. If you have a lot of subjects or a lot going on in your photo, obviously something like this isn't as easy. You can do a more detailed object grab where you can have Photoshop help select the area of the subject versus the background and divide it out that way. But it can get a little more complicated. So that's something I also keep in mind with my iPhone photos. A lot of my photos, it's a single subject with a simple background or nature, but that's also typically my work as well. But it can get a little more complicated if you have there's a lot going on in this photo. So, but if you have like a chain link fence or a busy mural on a wall, stuff like that, it could get a little more complicated in trying to separate that. So that's something to keep in mind. Maybe at that point, you just kind of leave the full thing and make the texture part of the photo. But with a scene like this, it's very easy to be able to separate the subject out just by taking him out and adding a background layer like that. So I like to do that. We can also bring down the brightness a little bit more, contrast, and then brush it off of him. So B, and kind of bring the sun to this area out here. So similar to what we did, I'm kind of bringing it where the sun is already hitting. We can also kind of keep this cloud. Toggle that on and off. That adds some more depth in there as well. There we go. I'm just going to flatten this. And then I'm going to make another copy layer. And I'm going to let's see. I'm going to try to add a glowy feel to it. So let's do soft light. We're going to go back to blur. I'm going to do Gaussian blur, and this time we're just going to do a soft blur. So you can see because it's under soft light, it's not taking the whole image. I can still see the background layer, but I'm just finding that just dreamy look. So if I do toggle it on and off, you can kind of see how it almost gives it a dreamy, glowy look. And then lower the opacity. And you can see it kind of adds a little bit of contrast and adds a little bit of a hazy dream. We can also make a new layer, and let's do a gradient, radial, and change the color. Just a warm, okay. I'm gonna make it smaller. Green. And again, I'm going to brush it off of him, this time pretty completely. And for this one, at a lower opacity, I might take it in where the shadows of the grass are as well, just to add a little depth to the light. Okay. Toggle that on and off. And let's take it off the clouds as well. Maybe lower it even more. Here we go. And you can see it just adds a little bit of a subtle light that just brings your eye to him even more than before. Flatten that. One last thing I'm going to fix his tag sticking out. And then it looks like this didn't get masked off. So let's just fill this in and this. Typically, I'll zoom in and really make sure the edges are nice and clean whenever when I mask him back on. If you have a clean background, it's really easy to do and it gets the edges. Or you can go to mask the edges and hair, refine hair and stuff like that, and it'll get it really well. But missed a little bit zooming in there. Okay. And so if another thing I might do would be to take out the shadow. Let me try patch tool. This is my shadow. The sun was behind us. And it doesn't bother me too much, but if we wanted to get rid of it, we could try. Just try to find a matching area a little bit. Let's see what that did. Deselect. And sometimes I'll take different healing tools just to kind of blend it a little better because you really have to watch your light and your texture with the various healing tools. Because for this, we want to make sure our focus is correct and the color and everything. And there's a lot going on here, so it's kind of an easy blend, but you still want to be able to make sure that your focus matches, that that's not super sharp that you just fixed and it's blurry, that kind of thing. So just kind of blend it out a little better and that'll work. So overall, this is probably how I would edit it. And you'd take an image like this that you could easily be able to take with your full frame versus your iPhone. You just want to be really conscious of your light, the range of your light, it being able to not be too high dynamic range where it's too far that your phone camera can't bring it back. And then simplify your subject from the frame. I think of my iPhone as another lens, just like I would take a picture with my 16 millimeter lens differently than I would take a picture with my 85 millimeter lens. They are two very different lenses that create very different photos. So when I started thinking of my phone that way, it helped me be able to frame and capture my subjects the way that I know that my phone can versus trying to mimic my full frame camera. They're not the same, so they won't take the picture the same. So when you can get your mindset that it is its own lens, it takes pictures in its own way, you can find the confidence to be able to use that camera the way it should be used. And you can take great pictures with it, just like you can with any lens that you were to pick up and use. So keep practicing and keep trying. If it's not working, simplify your subjects and your scenes until you start to understand the dynamics and how your phone works. And it will make life a lot easier and hopefully make you enjoy using your phone more. So if you want more information, feel free to check out my course. And I have all kinds of information in there to get you going as well, and a lot more editing videos in that course as well. Thank you so much for watching.